Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, today Congress has a historic opportunity to lay the groundwork to defend our nation against cyber attacks. And we're not just talking about mischievous online activity, but actions that could bring America to its knees. Unfortunately, this is not science fiction. America is under attack, not by armies advancing on our beaches or planes overhead, but in the virtual world where those who intend to do us harm have already penetrated our federal and private computer networks and continue to plot relentlessly to bring down our critical infrastructure, our water supply, nuclear facilities, air traffic control systems, electrical grid, and defense and banking systems are all vulnerable to a crippling attack. General Keith Alexander, director of the National Security Agency, said it is not a matter of if, but when a cyber Pearl Harbor occurs. We are just simply fortunate that a computer-based attack has not yet brought physical harm to Americans. But that is not for lack of trying. China has already successfully stolen some of our biggest military secrets, such as information about the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the Department of Defense's biggest weapons program ever. Now they know the program well enough not only to copy it, but to guard against it. Similar attacks continue unabated on our military's computer systems. Hackers trick soldiers into downloading viruses onto their computers, after which every keystroke is recorded. Mr. Speaker, our military secrets are being stolen every day. Imagine if agents of a foreign government were breaking into the Pentagon and stealing top secret documents, paper files. It would not be tolerated. It would be all over the front page of the Washington Post. And yet in the virtual world, that is occurring. In fact, an October 2011 report to Congress on foreign economic collection and industrial espionage states that it is part of China and Russia's national policy to try to identify and take sensitive technology which they need for their own development. In fact, they train and have a cyber warfare college. The degradation of our national security and intellectual property from cyber theft threatens to weaken us where we have historically been strong. The NSA calculates that Russia and China have stolen $1 trillion in American intellectual property, the biggest transfer of wealth in history. Their philosophy is why invent when you can steal it. And beside nation states, there are groups such as Anonymous, LulzSec, and AntiSec who indulge in non-state hacktivism. Their agenda is to bully, embarrass, and steal from those that they disagree with philosophically or politically. They think nothing of closing down websites, hacking into email and voicemails, taking sensitive information from those who don't do their bidding. There's been a lot of hard work going into this week, this Cyber Week, and a lot of thought to find solutions. As co-chair of the Center for Strategic and International Studies Commission on Cybersecurity for the 44th President, I helped draft recommendations for securing the country's government networks and critical infrastructures. As a member of the Speaker's Cyber Task Force and chairman of the House Cybersecurity Caucus, I helped present those recommendations to Congress and the legislation we have seen this week. The historic legislation the House votes on this week incorporates many of these recommendations. This bill, the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, gives the National Institute of Standards and Technology the authority to set security standards for federal computer systems and develop checklists for agencies to follow. Why is that important? It hardens our federal networks. Every federal agency has been hacked into by agents of a foreign power, by hacktivists. Every federal agency, including the Pentagon, has been hacked into. This bill will harden those federal networks and make them less vulnerable to such an attack. It also creates a federal university private sector task force to coordinate research and development. It establishes cybersecurity research and development grant programs and improves the quality of our cyber workforce by creating a scholarship program. Importantly, it creates an education and awareness program for computer hygiene. When you talk to the NSA, they tell you that computer hygiene accounts for the majority of cyber attacks. This would remedy the majority of vulnerabilities that we face. And finally, it sets forth procurement standards for hardware and software that will minimize security risks. This will also have a ripple effect in the private sector so that they will also adopt such procurement standards. Other legislation we saw that passed yesterday facilitates the sharing of information, of threat information, between the public and private sector, which controls most of our critical infrastructure. While it's not part of this bill, I think it's important to make the analogy that what we did yesterday was simply allow the federal government to share signature threat information with the private sector, similar to a police officer sharing with a homeowner a threat that they see of someone breaking into their house and then telling them how they can better protect their house and lock the door without the door being opened. These common sense reforms are a baseline of what we need to secure our infrastructure. We must take action before life is lost and our economy and defenses have been weakened to the point of damaging our country. One of the biggest failures after 9/11 was the knowledge that the attacks could have possibly been prevented with better intelligence, information sharing, and protective measures. It was also a lack of imagination. And while we can't change the past, we can use it as a lesson as we go forward in our modern cyber world, a world in which our water supply, defense systems, nuclear power plants, electrical grid, banking systems, FAA, and other critical infrastructures are vulnerable to cyber thieves, attacks, and terrorists. We know what has to be done. Mr. Speaker, the time to act is now. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 2096, the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act. I'd like to first thank my colleague, Mr. McCaul, for his hard work on this critical piece of national cybersecurity policy. As co-founder of the House Cybersecurity Caucus, Mr. McCaul has played a key role in this policy area that is becoming increasingly important to our nation. Our work together on this legislation, which began last Congress, demonstrates that this bill is good, bipartisan public policy that should once again receive overwhelming support in this House. In 2009, the President called for a comprehensive 60-day review of U.S. cyberspace policy. That call and the subsequent expert recommendations contained in the report led to a series of hearings on cybersecurity R&D and resulted in the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2010, which I sponsored and worked on with Mr. McCaul in the Science and Technology Committee in the last Congress. That bill passed this chamber by a vote of 422 to 5. Unfortunately, it was not taken up by the Senate. Since that time, cyber threats have only increased. So last May, Mr. McCaul and I introduced this bill once again to address the pressing education, research and development, and standards and practices aspects of cybersecurity. In America, every individual and every organization, including the federal government, is vulnerable to cybercrime. Our most sensitive data are stored on computers. And around the world, there are countless individuals, groups, and nations relentlessly focused on exploiting gaps in our cybersecurity system. The Federal Trade Commission estimates that identity theft costs consumers about $50 billion annually. The Department of Commerce was targeted this month in a cyber attack that required the Economic Development Administration to completely unplug from the network. And just yesterday, the Homeland Security Committee heard from witnesses about Iran's development of a cyber army. Cybercrime evolves as quickly as technology itself. Thus, it will take a collective effort by the federal government, the private sector, our scientists and engineers, and every American to defeat it. And H.R. 2096 will help to do this. The first step is education. This bill builds on existing partnerships, such as the NSF-sponsored Center for System Security and Information Assurance at Moraine Valley Community College in Palos Hills, Illinois. This community college has trained hundreds of teachers and college faculty in cybersecurity-related areas since 2003, individuals who are now teaching at colleges and technical training programs nationwide. H.R. 2096 also provides scholarships to students pursuing degrees in cybersecurity in exchange for their service in the federal IT workforce. This approach not only provides for the immediate workforce needs of the federal government, but it also builds a pipeline for private industry. Now, in addition to skilled IT workforce, our nation also needs advances in basic R&D. Cyber threats are constantly evolving, and cybersecurity R&D must reflect a comprehensive effort that builds towards a more secure foundation in the short and long terms. So this legislation requires relevant federal agencies to work with the National Science and Technology Council to develop a national strategic plan for cybersecurity R&D that sets priorities based on risk assessments, focuses on transformational technologies, and strengthens technology transfer programs. It will build on infrastructure that we need to get the best ideas out of the lab and into the marketplace. And because people are perhaps the weakest link in many IT systems, the research strategy will include the social sciences to help us better understand how humans interact with technology. Promoting public awareness of good computer hygiene can go a long way to protecting our systems. The dissemination of simple concepts, such as installing antivirus software and not opening emails from unknown sources, can go a long way in reducing the threat of cybercrime. The legislation also calls on the National Institute of Standards and Technology to be a leader in both domestic and international cybersecurity standards. As Mr. McCall said in H.R. 2096, tasked NIST with developing a comprehensive international cybersecurity strategy that defines what working and IT technical standards we need, determines where they're being developed, and ensures the United States is represented. And finally, in recognition of the federal government's increasing efforts to utilize remote data centers, known as cloud computing, in this Congress, I worked to add language so that the bill now directs NIST to work with other agencies and with experts in the private sector to ensure that consistent and secure standards on cloud computing are put in place across the federal government. As cloud computing is used more and more by the federal government, we must make sure that this data is safe. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a necessary and vitally important step towards securing our public, private, and personal IT systems. It is a good bipartisan bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I reserve the balance of my time.